John, thank you very much for coming here today. You worked for 38 years and you were the Detective Chief Superintendent of Police in Scotland and the co-founder of the very successful Violence Reduction Unit. And now you're known around the world as an ambassador for early childhood development. Can you tell us about how that came about?
Yeah, because I can. It's when I was investigating murders, which is usually what I did. I was so busy doing that I never thought for a moment, why do we have these murders? Why do we have this level of violence? And so in 2004, I was deputy head of our criminal investigation department in Strathclyde, which is in Scotland. And I was asked to develop a homicide reduction strategy. And so I'd always worked on the notion, and it always been successful, that if you get someone who's really clever and work with them, it always works much better. And so our principal intelligence analyst was Karen McCluskey. And I spoke with Karen, and we eventually reported to the Chief Constable that we couldn't write a homicide reduction strategy because most of the homicides were a happenstance, but the violence was deliberate. But what he should do is write a violence reduction strategy. That would be the smart thing to do. So he said, and we actually thought he would give it to someone else to do, but he didn't. He said, go and do it. And he was an outstanding leader. He was one of those people who allowed you to do it. He gave you permission to the space to do it. So we didn't think any more about policing. We thought and started to research things. We actually treated it on reflection almost like a murder inquiry. Because we sought evidence. We had some hypothesis, then we sought evidence to support it, and then as the evidence came in, we reinforced it and corroborated the evidence, and eventually said, well, if we know all this, what are we going to do? And that's when we found, in 2004, WHO had said violence was a public health issue. This made sense to us, and we read that report from Etienne Krug, and speaking about violence like a health issue meant we could speak about a whole range of other things, because we could speak about prevention, we could speak about contagion, we could speak about a whole range of other things, where if you're only speaking about it as a police officer, it's already happened, so you're only speaking about detecting the person who did it. So that's how we ended up doing it. So we set up the Violence Reduction Unit, and we consciously didn't say the Violent Crime Reduction Unit, we said Violence Reduction Unit, because violence is bullying to suicide. But what we do if we just leave it in the criminal justice arena is that we think violence is only that which is reported to the police. And that's absurd, because that doesn't reflect at all what's happening. So that's how we started doing it. And after that, it was a fabulous journey of learning and understanding.
Right. And could you tell me a little bit about the things I know that you're a great believer in action. Can you tell us a little bit about the sort of programs or the sort of things that you did, the action that you took?
One of the things that we found almost immediately was when we uncovered this evidence, we were excited by this evidence. We were excited about the economic benefits and about the effectiveness. We met Suzanne Zedek and we spoke, we can really shape, this is how we do this, and it all made sense. And so, but we realised when we spoke to other professionals that we had to change their attitudes about things. So one of the biggest things that we did, which is quite probably a nebulous concept, was that we started to do lots of media. We started to speak about early years. We started to speak about policing's really good, but it ain't going to fix this. We started to say that violence was everyone's issue, and that good education policy will reduce violence. A good violence policy will help improve health. And we started to join these things up, and we made ourselves available. We invited every editor of a newspaper into our office at different times and spoke to them and said, we're going to do this in a different way. You don't need to be a cheerleader, but you need to have evidence there, because if you don't put the right things in, we will challenge it. And most of them said, they responded positively. When we spoke to professionals, what we found interestingly was some of them, not all of them, but a significant proportion said, you're right. We need to do something different, because we had lots of people who arrived at the crossroads at the same time. So we ended up with this coalition of the willing, where we started then to change attitudes, and people thought about things in a different way. I suppose one of the best examples of how we tried to do that was that during one of the elections, I was interviewed by a newspaper, and one of the political parties had said that if you elect us, we will give you there'll be 1,000 extra police officers. So I'd been interviewed by this reporter who's the chief reporter, and he said the Scottish National Party have said you'll have 1,000 extra police officers. That will be a good thing for violence. I said, oh, that will be really good. 1,000 extra police officers would be really good. I said, but you know what would be really clever? 1,000 extra health visitors. That would be the clever thing to do. And what we were trying to do was, we were trying to pick a fight. Yeah. We were trying to put it out there. We were trying for somebody to say, no, it's not, so that we could debate it. Because we had found that we had lots of people agreed with us, but didn't do anything about it. Right. We called them the super agreeables, who always nodded their head and said, yes, yes.
Like I'm doing now.
Yeah, yes. Well, you're doing it with a little bit more purpose, and you're actually doing things anyway. So we had to get to that stage where you're saying, right, okay, so what? So what does this mean? So that when that went out, we were expecting people to challenge us. Mm-hmm. No one did. Right. No one did. In fact, we get invited to more conferences to speak about it. And I always felt really embarrassed because I wasn't saying anything that other professionals hadn't been saying for decades. Health visitors, paediatricians, early years developmental psychologists, they had been saying it for years. You've been saying this for years. And here was me, I'd only learned about it 2 or 3 years, and I was saying it and been invited to speak. But then we realised it was because I was a police officer.
Different credibility.
It was authentic, and it was something different. And I had said, I believe if you improve early years, you will reduce violence and you'll reduce murders. And I still believe that, and it'll happen. We do it, and so that made the difference. But the attitudes were the biggest thing. We did small projects. We did things in prison about fathers. Mm-hmm. We put posters beside the phone so that when they called home, here's some of the things you should say to your children and some of the things you shouldn't say to your children, which is an idea we picked up in Jamaica. We do things in schools about sexual violence, an idea from America. We train dentists to identify the signs of domestic violence. Glasgow now has Triple P, which is the parenting programme. Glasgow education is now becoming nurture in every classroom in every school. They're increasing nurture. So I think what we did was help the conversation.
Right.
And because the evidence is so cast iron, as soon as the conversation got out there, everyone realised it was the right thing to do.
Right.
We set up, the Scottish Parliament now want Scotland to be the best place in the world to grow up. So they've started an early years collaborative, which is about examining in detail and changing the things that we do with pregnant mums and up to age 3. So it's health visitors, midwives, doctors, social workers, teachers. They all work together in a collaborative. We have early years leaders in every local authority, and what they do is they just change things, small things. They use a health improvement programme, and it's now about 18 months old. In fact, there's a learning session on now. I spoke at the last learning session, and I'm still on. They created an early years task force, and I was invited on the early years task force with the Children's Commissioner, the Chief Medical Officer, a Deputy Chief Constable from the Police, and it's about that. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we can start to change things.
And you identify this, making it a public health issue as being key to achieving these changes.
Absolutely, because it allowed us then to share it out. Because what we do in most places is we put everything into little boxes, and then we build sandbags around them and we can't do anything. So we start then, for instance, to define people by the service that we deliver to them. So if I'm a doctor, you're a patient. If I'm a teacher, you're a student. If I'm a police officer, you're a witness or you're an accused. If I'm it's the same people. So we need to start and think about how our services are and what we do. So it allowed us health. It also allowed us to speak about prevention in a much more detailed way. Because up until then, if you speak about police, prevention will be either locking someone up, which means when they're in prison they can't assault anyone. It will mean bars on windows so they can't break in, alarms so the alarm will go off, guards. But we had nothing at all about the social determinants that created that: inequality, poverty, lack of aspiration. And health allowed us to do that. And health also, it gave us a brand new chest of evidence, solid evidence. And we could uncover that and say, here's why you should do that.
Right, okay. I'd like now to go to an issue which is quite thorny. It's been mentioned during the conference already, that rehabilitation as a really tough gig. And yet I know you've seen many success stories. Are there any identifiable principles or lessons that seem to be common to these cases?
Yeah.
Success cases.
Usually the success cases are that people have individuals have decided themselves they want to change their life. It's a bit, it's almost like the 10-step program. You know, it's almost like that addiction thing. That if you don't decide you want to change things yourself, you won't do it. And if you think about some of the cognitive behavioural therapy programs, they require the individual to get to the stage where they're ready to change before they can do it. So for me, the key is that if someone says, I want not to do this anymore. And so when we ran our gangs initiative in Glasgow, it was based on an American thing because we stole it. We're humans. It's the same wherever you go. And that was designed for black African American males living in big cities, aged usually between 18 and 25. For us, white indigenous Scottish males living in poor areas. So everything was the same except the colour. So it was never a race issue. And it wasn't about the gangs. It was about the violence. So we had said, we don't want to dismantle gangs. We don't mind gangs. I'm in a gang. Police was a gang. JUCONI's a gang. We're all in gangs. That's what humans do. It's what the gang does that's the issue. So play football, play rugby, play chess, whatever you like, but stop fighting. So we started then to think much more about, when we brought the gang members in, we brought them into court. And in the court, we started off with 90 gang members. And we persuaded them, we cajoled them, we got them in with a whole range of reasons at court. But we also had in the court social workers, teachers, people from the community. And what we said, the judge came onto the bench in the court, and unscripted, in the very first one, he said, I want to welcome everyone to the court today. He said, particularly you young men at the back of the court, because even if you don't care about yourselves, we do. And we've had enough of the violence. We want no more of the violence. So tomorrow's a different day. And then we had a police officer speak to them, a surgeon, a maxillofacial surgeon speak to them, and the most powerful, we had about 9 or 10 people speak to them. And the message was, we've had enough. It doesn't have to be like this. And if you want to change, we will help you. And the most powerful woman, or the most powerful speaker, was a mum whose son had died. And it was just, I can still get emotional thinking about it. Because it's really, she was so powerful. Because she said she still smelled her son. She still bought his favourite food. And she said, don't do that to your mums. And it was, and when she was speaking, all their heads went down. Their heads went down. That's that. And I was sitting there saying, this is early years. This is early years. These guys were so connected to their mum. Even from the most difficult of circumstances, that when you mentioned their mum, that was it. And we had about 700 of these young guys got engaged with us. They played football, we got them in courses, we got some of them jobs, and some of them still offended, but they weren't as violent. We don't have gang fighting anymore. A couple of them work for us. We have one, and they've had addiction issues. So it was about, you need to give people the chance. You need to give them the opportunity, and that was just a staged opportunity to do that. But if we don't forgive people, prison costs £34,000. That's tax money.
That's per person.
That's per person per year. I would much rather they were paying taxes rather than spending taxes.
Yeah, being given that money.
Absolutely. Do something about it, because it's hugely important. And if you met, some of these men and a couple of women who work for us, who've had chaotic lives, their stories are inspiring. They are inspiring, and it's never too late. So whilst the early years is hugely important, we can still change it later on, but it becomes more difficult. So, and the other thing too is, when we speak about these young men in prison, it occurred to us that teachable moment. We think of them as prisoners. Well, think of them as fathers. What would you do then?
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. And so it was about that. And sometimes it's so obvious when somebody says, you think, oh, never thought of that before, but yeah, and it was there. So, so the key for redemption is, if people are ready, then services need to get around them and help them do it. And if they fail, pick them back up and help them again. That's what we need to do.
And it also sounds like you're saying that the emotional element is key.
Oh.
That if you find that emotional
Touch it.
leverage, then
touch it.
One is what will start creating the relationships and the feelings
it does.
Make things change.
And it's that we speak to the human in us. And that's the thing that makes it so important. James, who works for us, James was convicted of a homicide where he fell out and he killed his best friend and served time in prison. He was an alcoholic. He had real problems. Turned himself around and now works for us. And we had James speaking, and James has spoken to politicians. He's spoken to, like the group we spoke to yesterday in Mexico. He's spoken to groups like that. And he says, I'm only here because people like you care for people like me. And it's just, you think, okay. And it's that it speaks to that. It speaks to the human in us that says we should do that for somebody. It's empathy. It's the glue that holds society together. Hugely important.
I think that's a powerful moment to end on.
Thank you
very much indeed.
Thank you.